This meeting is being
Hello, Vince.
recorded.
How are you?
Good day. I'm good. How about you?
I'm all right. Sorry, I just came in the door trying to set up my little camera there. Did you see the email about Ismail?
Yes, I did. I had heard earlier what one of his colleagues in Azerbaijan sent a note out, and I apologize. I should have forwarded it to you, and I didn't.
Oh, no, don't worry about that. It's just quite shocking.
Yeah, it's scary as hell. What I worry about is left brain problems and, the hazards of speech, aphasia, and things like that.
Yeah, these things are not free, even if, so I expect people to come in a few minutes late as normal, just for this. On the, for our future of text, I'm thinking maybe the RSA could be our venue.
Oh, that's interesting. That you realized, of course, that that's ambiguous. RSA is also a crypto algorithm.
It is indeed.
So that's the Royal Society of Arts, is that right?
Yeah, it's the Royal Society of the Advancements of Arts and Enterprise, and yeah, I can't see the full name, but I am a fellow here, so I'm going to propose that they co-host it with us, so we don't have to pay them tons of money.
Well, that's a clever idea. If that doesn't work, I'm a fellow at the Royal Society, and so that's another possibility.
4 p.m.
Oh yeah, that could be fun too. And here's Bob as well, and we have an audience of Mark. I have only spent the entire week with Mark in Barcelona, so I'm so grateful to see him once again. We did have a wonderful time at the Hypertext conference. It really was fantastic to be with a bunch of people.
Good. There was another event in Barcelona. I would have, if I had known about the Hypertext conference, I might have actually gone to Barcelona.
Yeah, that would have been good. It was, sorry.
Well, going to Barcelona is a good idea no matter what's going on. Yeah, it's a wonderful town.
A bit scented, a bit smelly, but yeah, other than that, it's nice.
I will be there later in the summer. But
good. Bob, we're hosting the Future of Text in London this year, 27th and 28th of October.
Of October. That is the same weekend as Peter Brantley's conference.
Who's that?
Peter Brantley of Read 2.0.
Oh, okay, right.
I mean, it's called Page Break. I mean, Peter was the original Books and Browsers conference.
Oh, really?
Being reconfigured. I mean, it's directly in the same space as yours.
Wait. This isn't right. I think it's September, not October.
Which one? Page Break or
calendar? I'm here in Washington, D.C. on October 27th. I have meetings already scheduled.
Oh, really?
So September 27, I think, is the date that we picked.
Oh, okay. This is probably good to get sorted out.
Yes. I'm in Heidelberg the previous week, and then we're flying in on the 25th of September to London. And I have some events on the 26th, so we reserved the 27th of September. I wonder if we somehow got the month off.
Yeah, I see here the emails with Carla. Oh my gosh, at the end, it was that's fascinating. Okay, fine. I haven't announced it to anyone, so yeah, it's the 27th of September then.
Fantastic. I mean, that's great because I've already committed to give a talk at the other conference. But
good. So we took care of that right off the bat.
Very good.
But Vint, are those the best days of London that week? Because that's a Monday and Tuesday. It would be nice.
No, the 27th is a Tuesday, and that's the only day I have available. The 26th, I have work to do.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's nice of you to say that this is not work.
Well, mumble.
Hi, Brandel. We'll give people 2 more minutes to filter in, but yeah, I'm glad we caught that. That's easy. As an update, Klaus, who was host of the the Hypertext conference a few years ago, Klaus Atzenbach, he may be doing co-hosting of this Future of Text this time to make it more cleanly academic, which could be fun. But the format will be as we usually have it. We also have, as you know, monthly presentations, and we have smaller ones. And Bob, you're a smaller one today because that's what you've requested so far. Should you want a bigger one, you can do that. But this is also the transcript of this conversation, apart from us yapping away now, will also go into our journal, and the bits of the journal then go into the Future of Text book at the end of the year.
I'm still in small group presentation mode, so this is perfect.
Excellent. So Brandel, you have a new job. Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone again?
Sure. So I believe I'm publicly permitted to say that my new title will be the founding member of the Immersive Web Experiences Prototyping Group. And so to that end, my function will be, and I think it's the only one at Apple, is to build ideas of how the web should work for the benefit of helping Safari think about what they should be building for devices now into the future. So I'm really excited about that. So it does have immersive in the title. There's not really much that Apple is willing to say about that at this point, but I think that the remit generally is to think about what it is that the web and the internet is for things now as well as the future. But that means really thinking about what it is that the web is as distinct from other forms of computing. And my take on that is that it's about documents, it's about information, it's about linking, and it's about navigation. Because applications that can be immersive or not are about some of those things, but they're also about graphics, and they're about video game kind of experiences and things like that. But the web, while it can have a sort of a taste of that, has these informational sort of hypertextual questions at its core, because nothing else has those really. You know, Photoshop doesn't have the same job as Wikipedia.
Brendel, are you familiar with Muriel Cooper's work from the late 80s?
Muriel Cooper, no.
She was a professor at the List Center at MIT, and in the early 90s, she put out a film showing how people would someday be navigating through three-dimensional data space. And what I'm going to show in a little bit, we imagine 10 years from now that's exactly what will be happening, is the kind of stuff that we're showing will be in an immersive environment.
Brilliant. That sounds really exciting to look into as a reference point, and I look forward to that as well. But yeah, so I'm really excited about it. One of the things that it's interesting is that I actually don't know if there are other groups or people involved in that kind of effort. I was curious, Vint, if you know if anybody does that sort of thing at Google as well. But yes.
Vint, I see you have your hand, and obviously go ahead, but I just want to translate what Brandel said. He's working on VR for the web for Apple. Mm-hmm. That's my interpretation.
I am a member of the web, the immersive web experiences. The immersive web standards group. So to that end, yes, that's something that I do.
You know that the acronym for immersive web experience project is, or protocol or what have you, is sort of I wept. All right, so much for my fun and games. Just two things to respond to your question. I don't know to what extent there is, well, there is certainly interest in AR, VR experiences, or XR, if you like, at Google. We made a big bet that didn't seem to work out too well in Magic Leap, as some of you may know. And I don't know whether any of the technology arising from that has survived. It's not been an area of focus for me. I will, however, go find out more because I'm convinced that the company believes that this is important for its attention. So that's one thing. The second thing I wanted to mention is that in the 1980s at MIT, there was a DARPA-funded project called the Spatial Data Management System, or Database Management System. And this was Nick Negroponte, essentially flying through cyberspace. He would sit in a chair with some controls on the chairs, joystick kinds of things, and a big screen up ahead, and he would literally project himself flying around in these databases, and they were like sort of like filing cabinets, and the closer you got, they would whisper at you what they had inside, and the closer you got, the louder it got. So the idea of multi-dimensional spatial navigation is 40 years old at least, maybe more. But the tools that are available have changed a great deal, plainly.
Mark, and then I have a question in the sidebar, and then I think we can go bobbing in a second. I'm very much looking forward to what you have to talk about today, Bob.
Okay. I just pop in a brief thing to say that well, hopefully the talks will be up, I think, on the SIGWeb website from Hypertext. But it was interesting to see that the Klaus Axenbeck's group at HUF in northern Bavaria are still working with their spatial hypertext. So I think they're the last people standing, seemingly, in this area. But it's really sad to see their funding's run out. But I was thinking in that mention of sort of, flying through hyperspace and things, is that that in a sense that they're making, I think, what's an interesting, if unintentional, link between this VR space or AR space and spatial, sort of two-dimensional spatial hypertext. Their system, in a sense, where how close things are or how distant affects the suggestions that are made to the user from an underlying knowledge base. And I think that one of the issues they face is everything's being done on too small a scale in front of people who don't have a big enough problem to solve. And one of the things I hope to do is see if I can find a slightly larger knowledge base run by someone who can write a decent sized check to make things happen, because I still find spatial hypertext to be very compelling, and also works, I think, quite well with our sort of associative way of thinking. So bridging, just melding from what hitherto has been a two-dimensional experience into a VR type one seems a logical progression to make.
Yeah, and then someday soon we're going to put a headset on you too, right? We'll have to schedule an Oculus Quest event. Right, I think we have a quorum, or however it's pronounced. And Peter is here for the first time ever. He's been here for 200 meetings almost, but we've never actually seen him. So welcome, Peter. But more to the point, Bob, over to you.
Peter, are you in Trinity Library, or is that just a background?
Just a virtual background, so you don't see the elder horror of my office.
Great.
Oh, sorry. First of all, we are recording. Hope you're all okay with that. It's going to go on YouTube, and then the main thing will be transcribed.
Okay. So what I'm going to show you is Brewster Kale asked me to sort of think about how the archive could be more useful. And I got him to hire one of my colleagues from the Institute for the Future of the Book, Dan Weisel. And we chatted for a long time and started exploring, and we ended up someplace that I wasn't expecting, which was that after 40 years of elaborating linear texts, I think we have finally figured out a way, at least we're hinting at what comes next in terms of how people are organizing content and presentations. So I'm going to share my screen, and please, at any point, interrupt.
I'll just interrupt to say happy 4th of July. Forgot about that. I apologize.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I'm happily not in, I'm happily, let me see if I can get, there we are. Okay. So whenever I have a new tool, I put Vannevar Bush's As We May Think into it. My colleague was a literature major, and he fell in love with Emily Dickinson, and he always starts with a favorite poem by Emily Dickinson. And so these are 8 versions of the exact same poem in the Internet Archive, and these are all operating book reader windows from the archive, and you can zoom in and they all work. This is going to be fast. I'm just going to run you through a bunch of these quickly. This is Dan's wife.
Hi, I'm Kim Beeman, and I'm going to talk about a few of my favorite cookbooks today. I'm actually—
So that's the introduction she makes. She is a librarian. If I click on one of the cookbooks down here below, it opens up. There's another introduction by her. Dan put this background image, and these are 2 versions of the cookbook that he found on the archive, in the archive. Here we're just showing that, let me see if I can get rid of this. Here we're just showing that we can sync up an audio or video with an object. So I'm going to play this, and when she gets through a short introduction, the focus is going to shift to the First Amendment, and then it would shift to the others.
The United States Bill of Rights, the 10 original amendments to the Constitution of the United States. Read for LibriVox.org by Andrea Fiore, December 27th, 2007. 1.
Like so. This is really, this one has to do with how we actually got where we got to. We were trying to do a demo where I was looking for that famous image of the first 4 nodes of the internet, and I couldn't find it at the Internet Archive. I'm sure it's there somewhere, but their search is so terrible. But I by complete accident, found this talk that Alan gave in 1995 at a symposium. Vint, you may have been there.
Yeah.
And it's really quite a remarkable presentation of the history of computing in the 60s. And I was so excited because Alan made it very clear that the ideological basis of what was happening in the 60s was quite different than what emerged by the mid 70s with Microsoft and Bill Gates. And I really wanted just everybody under 50 who's working in inventing our digital future, I wanted them to watch this film, but I realized there was no way I was going to get anybody under 50 to watch a film by somebody that they had never heard of. So breaking it up into chapters, and it just, there was nothing out there that did what we wanted it to do. And so these are just 3 very short bits at the beginning. If I click on the Engelbart section, you get, I'm sorry, I'm on a slow connection in a hotel in Birmingham, but you get Doug Engelbart's Wikipedia page, you get the Mother of All Demos video, you get the Mother of All Demos Wikipedia page, and you get the brilliant, which I'm sure all of you have seen, Ted Nelson's brilliant eulogy for Engelbart. And then, so back to spatial data management. Voyager published this fantastic video disc that the Architecture Machine Group, now the Media Lab, made. And these were the liner notes for the video disc. But it's all of the early sort of greatest hit demos from the Architecture Machine Group. And these 4 were sort of 4 of my favorites. This is the Aspen movie map. And if you'll recall, there's a point at which you can stop the joystick, turn to the left, and go into a building and explore it. Well, several weeks ago, Google showed their immersive map system, and it only took them 40 years, but now they're showing people going inside of a restaurant and exploring it. And I just thought it was sort of perfect to be able to add that to the tapestry. Because one of the things about tapestries, I think that's important, is that the dividing line between a reader and a writer is as thin as we can possibly make it. So it's very easy for a reader of a tapestry to fork it. And as I did here, I added this video from the Google presentation. This is really an art exhibit. In 2000, we put out a tool called TK3, which was our attempt at the time to get as close to HyperCard as we could. And we gave it to an artist who made these remarkable books. They don't run anymore, of course, but I had videos that I'd made of people working through them. And so this is just a bunch of these videos, and it plays. But it as a curatorial tool to make this presentation, it worked perfectly. Get this out of the way.
Bob,
Yeah.
it's Vin.
Yeah.
Just a question. You said, of course, it doesn't run anymore. Would you tell me what's missing? Is it an operating system, an
Yeah,
application?
I mean, it runs on Windows actually perfectly. It doesn't run on the Mac anymore.
Got it. Okay.
I mean, almost everything that we did in the 80s and 90s, I mean, not almost, without exception, on the Macintosh, nothing runs anymore. And almost without exception, everything does run in Windows.
Wow, that's actually quite an impressive observation.
It's an amazing thing that they have kept this stuff going in Windows. So this is interesting. These 8 windows are different different hours of the day from a particular television station in Russia. And we wanted to show what Russians were seeing during the Ukraine war on their home televisions. And these are all, so I can zoom in on these and they all play.
Actual real neo-Nazis in Ukraine.
Now, what's interesting is that, fast forward a little bit, and this is the Internet Archive just released this. It's a visual explorer. These 7 windows are 7 different television stations in Russia, and these are thumbnails captured during the entire day's presentation. And any one of them, I can just click on it.
Тоже будет промежуточным рубежом. То есть по мере того, как мы продвигаемся, есть угроза окружения, но не...
It's amazing to me to see this kind of facility at this point to browse such a large database of material so easily and have it available. So this is simply 3 classic video games running in a tapestry in the browser. And I'm sorry it's so slow. It usually by now they'd all be running. Oh, what a shame. Because
Bob, you don't need to apologize for a bad internet connection. We've been there.
yeah, but it screws up a fantastic demo.
No, we'll just wait a bit. This is amazing.
Let's see if we can get them to come up any faster. We'll come back. We'll come back there. When I saw code running inside of a tapestry, I got very excited. So I thought I'd make one of HyperCard. And what we have here is what I still consider sort of the first electronic book, which we made at Voyager, running inside of a window in this tapestry. And any more luck here? Oh, here we go. It's amazing to me to see that. So here's BASIC running in a window, and
Wow.
a programming book for kids on how to program in BASIC. And I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be fantastic for a teacher to be able to, give high school students the assignment of, I want you to see what programming was like in 1980. So here's the assignment, here's a place where you can do it, and here's an instruction manual if you need it. Now, this is simply a Wayback Machine page. Got to get this out of the way. And one of the things we've done is when you put a Wayback Machine page into a tapestry, it comes with a scrubber at the bottom. So if I want to get a different date for this website,
Wow.
it's all just here, and
Wow.
which is pretty wonderful.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Indeed.
Yeah. So let's go to this date here.
It's Vic again. Can I interrupt with one more question?
Yeah, of course.
This is startlingly fascinating, and I'm assuming something that I want to verify.
Okay.
It looks almost as if each window in the tapestry is running as a virtual machine, so it might
Yes.
have quite a base for it could be different operating systems and different applications running within each window. Is that a correct assumption?
You're probably way above my technical pay grade at the moment. Each one of them is they're basically iframes.
Okay.
So I don't think there's anything conceptually about what you're saying that couldn't be true. In other words, could I be running parallels in a window here if I want? Maybe, I suppose I could.
Well, if we could make it work that way, if these were really VMs, then you just showed a way of hanging onto old software and old content.
I think that's certainly that would be a goal. I mean, we're not there. I mean, that's not what I'm showing you right now, but I think in terms of getting there, absolutely, that's the intent.
That would be nothing short of spectacular.
Good. So this is another piece based on an IFBook blog post. And if you'll remember, there was this point around 2005 when Jaron wrote this terrible essay about why he hated Wikipedia. And a whole lot of us wrote in response to it. And I was looking at this blog post, and I was realizing that all this blog post really is an annotated guide to a bunch of web links. And I thought it would be interesting because we could do it in a tapestry of turning it inside out. And instead of featuring our annotation to a list of web links, why not just put the links themselves live into a tapestry? So here's Jaron's original essay, and all the other essays that are referred to are all here. Now, we think that the tapestries are hinting at least a new media type. But in order for it to be a new media type, it has to be portable. It can't just sort of live only at the Internet Archive. So what's interesting is that if I add the word embed here, it's going to take me to a page where I'm going to change the width here, 1792. And then I'm going to grab this HTML and I'm going to go to this dashboard. This is just a WordPress blog that I've got. And I'm going to make a new post and demo tapestry, demo for future of the book or whatever. I think I got that wrong, but text. Future of text. There we go. And then I'm going to put in the custom HTML, and I'm going to go up here in preview and a new tab, and it's going to take that tapestry and it's going to embed it into this blog post. And this is all operating. And so at least it's showing the concept of portability. And there's one more thing to show you, which is that.
Could you wait just a
Yep.
second?
Yep, of course.
All right to keep interrupting you.
Vin, nothing could make me happier.
So in this particular case, what has actually happened? What has been imported into the web page that you just created?
So the tapestries, as you see them, are simply a collection of URLs.
Okay.
Of iframes so that each one of these windows it calls a URL from the Internet Archive.
Okay.
Okay.
And this. Okay. Wow. It could call it from anywhere, but
Yes,
in this case,
exactly. And I believe, for example, when you saw the tapestry that I did, the Ted Nelson YouTube video, I don't know that tapestry actually, I don't think we had to import that video into the Internet Archive. I think we're just grabbing, for Wikipedia and YouTube both, I think we can just grab the URL. So here's the last one. One of the things that is that we're able to take a collection, which is what from the Internet Archive, and import it automatically into a tapestry. And this happened to be a collection of Atari magazines. And I was just playing around and I imported it. And so these are all active windows, and each one of these is a different magazine. And when I saw this, I got really excited because I realized that in some ways, what was happening was that I was, let me go back to the, don't die on me now. Go ahead, just go back. We reset. That I was, no, sorry. I hate to screw everything up at the end. All right. Anyway, that this started to feel like going back into the stacks. What we've learned with these tapestries at this point is that having all of these objects operating in the same visual field is way more different than we expected. That it seems to reduce friction for the reader dramatically. I mean, if you think of something like this, that, oh, it's fine. Let me go back to one of these. Yeah, something like this, where instead of having to go somewhere every time I click on one of these things and come back, like you do on the web, and so you have to think all the time, do I want to explore? Is it worth clicking on this? Having everything visible at once, starts to make a very big difference. It makes the reader, encourages the reader to explore more. And so when I saw the Atari magazines all together, I realized it started to feel like being in the stacks again, where all the books are sitting on the shelf and you just sit there and you pick them off, serendipitously one after another. And the cost of opening up another book is so low compared to what it's been on the internet. So this is an interesting shift that we're seeing. So I'm going to stop. Yeah.
Bob, it's been actually, I think there's something more powerful happening beyond the stacks metaphor, and that's context preservation. What's happening in the tapestry is that it is preserving a substantial degree of context for the user.
Exactly.
And that's a strikingly powerful notion I've never seen it illustrated quite so with such facility. This is really fascinating. Have you published anything at this point?
No.
Wow. There's one other odd, how shall I say this, coincidence. There is a company which got started about a year ago called V Tapestry, lowercase v, capital T. It was started by a woman who does montages in the course of conferences. So you have somebody with a giant canvas and people are talking and they illustrate what was being said. And so she does these things, one after the other. Sometimes there could be a dozen or more of these very big canvases reflecting what was discussed and with lots of symbolism. She's automated this process. And so V Tapestry is a company that will take the incoming text of the discussions and generate imagery to automate the process. It's quite different from.
Yeah, I understand.
Anyway, but fascinating. Frode, you got your hand up.
I was just writing in notes. I was in a completely different window. Yeah, Bob, thank you very, very much. Really good to see this. I'm going to go back to the other window because that's my notes. You said that it's way more different than you expected. And I know that you obviously have experience with VR going way back to different degrees. And I only became converted by Brandel in January. Before that, I had actively stayed away from it because the future of text was a specific focus. And then I decided to branch out. Now, obviously, what you're working on here would be tremendous to have wall size. Bob Horn often joins our community, and he is all about murals, as you know. And one of the things that was really shocking to me is that Brandel took one of his murals, built a little, relatively speaking, Brandel, a little app for it where all you can do is stand in a room, there's nothing but the mural. The mural's really big, but you pinch to move it away from you and move it towards you. So there's no walking so that you don't get sick or anything like that. And you can move it sideways. That's all you can do. It's just incredibly powerful because it's almost undescribable how powerful it is considering there's nothing there. So I could imagine what you're working on here. First of all, obviously on a wall, but if this was in even a normal kind of office room, because when you talked about preserving context, Vince, I could imagine that you literally keep one wall for work, one for a specific project, the one in front of you for something else. Because everybody talks about this. What I'm saying is obvious, but what was so amazing to see today is all the aliveness that comes through it.
Mm-hmm. I didn't use the phrase that I should have, is that tapestries are infinite canvases, right? So they can go on forever, at which point you need some form of zoomable UI. Right, you need to be able to fly around in there and zoom in on something and expand it.
Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to praise that you showed. When you clicked on a thingy, it became full screen. Yeah. That is so important. When I worked with Selena Chow on the Chinese website for the NBA, the American NBA in China, we built a version of HyperWords where you could click on a player's name and you got a little bit of stats. And you would click on that and would go big. She wanted it to be semi-transparent and smaller. And that's in arguing with her. That's when I realized that if you're looking at something, make it big because that's what you're looking at. Make it quick to go small again. But here, no, you didn't play it with a little bit of this and that. It was just so relaxing on the eye. Thank you. Brandel.
Amazing work, really exciting. One question is, if you are browsing the same tapestry in multiple windows, is there, there would be facility for synchronizing them or aspects of them. Is that something that you've considered in terms of either the maintenance of sort of view state or in order to be able to use multiple sort of nominal windows, be they real or virtual, to be able to synchronize sort of views over things?
Nope. Really interesting though. I think that just so to answer that partially by going back to what Frode said, which is that I think what, somebody asked me, so how long did this take you to do? And I said, well, it's either 3 months or 40 years, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing technically very interesting yet about what we've done, right? But it's conceptual. I mean, I was showing this to somebody the other day, to Howard Besser. I don't know if you know, he's an archivist at NYU. And Howard was saying, oh my God, this is the stuff that we imagined 40 years ago that we would do someday. And now, and what's happened is that the internet has gotten so much more powerful that things that we could only imagine back in the pre-internet days, but we couldn't do once the internet took over in terms of electronic sort of expression. We had to really reduce our sense of what was possible. But now the internet, the web has gotten so much better that we're able to do things that we forgot we were interested in a way.
Yeah, it's another question that I have, or observation, is one, obviously in a zooming user interface, your documents need to just sort of withstand a lot of zooming. Does that direct and guide your sense of which documents work well? Like you have YouTube videos and archive.org videos that have start frames that are or frames that are representative at some level of them that can do so at a glance. Not all content on the internet is so well kind of entitled or predisposed to being able to kind of zoom like that. Do you feel like there's anything that can be done to help it in terms of having those things be different sizes, or have you put signposting that is something other than the documents themselves inside these tapestries to support that?
Signposting, yes. I mean, we are able, I mean, just in terms of, it goes back to Vince's comment. I mean, first of all, okay, let me try this. One of the things that the key thing that got us where we got to was that when we were working on the Alan Kay videos and there were all these objects and ideas that we wanted to put together, Dan was reading Merlin Sheldrake's book on the communication that goes on with fungi in the forest. And Dan said, well, suppose we actually thought for a minute about the fact that the objects in the Internet Archive are like trees, they're the nodes, but suppose the connections between the trees had as much, or at least important information, that showing the connections between objects is actually crucially important. And that was how we really ended up with tapestries. And Brendel, both of the things you've asked, we haven't thought about. It's so early, but that's why I like showing it to smart people, because they start to raise questions that show us where we have to go.
Well, Bob, that's why you need to come back. We're here same time every Friday, every Monday, except for last week when we had hypertext. I see your hand, Peter, but I just wanted to do my little standing up on a soapbox for a few seconds, because you made such a really important point there, Bob, about this is what we dreamt about 40 odd years ago. And why hasn't it happened? It's not just because the internet is more powerful and computers more powerful, although of course that's useful. It's also because you did it. It's really important. So I'm both paying you a compliment, and I'm really trying to highlight the fact that commercial pressures are one thing. What can augment is another thing. And the reason our little group here is now 99% focused on VR is because we're going to go into the same situation. I feel almost like Bandly 5, original Mac people and all of that stuff. There's an excitement now, and that's all nice. It makes me feel very youthful. But what I really, really fear is if there isn't a user and academic community that is saying the stuff that you are saying. It's like, these are the things we can use to augment how we work. It's only going to be, how can Apple make more money? How can Facebook/Meta make more money? And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with commercial development. But what you've done, as you said, technically, it isn't a miracle. The miracle is that you put in the effort and you're now making it available, right? So when it comes to VR, right now we have this beautiful, oh, it's exciting and new. But in a few years, I think we're going to be where we've been for the last 30 years in flatland. You know, there's so many things that can be done, but the market forces are so powerfully doing, you know, Macintosh Pages and Microsoft Office. Where is the Bob Stein innovation going to fit in that, right? So that is why we're fighting. And that's why this future of text this year will be, how can we work in VR? Over to Peter.
Okay, I was wondering if you'd given any thought to multi-user scenarios so that you could be looking at a tapestry on your machine, but have that synced with the tapestry on my machine, so we could have multiple cursors visible on the screen at the same time, and we could have mixed initiative and exploring together.
That is certainly something that we imagine we will get to. I mean, what I'm showing you today is simply a proof of concept. Okay, we are, you know, we have to build this. On the other hand, what used to take millions of dollars and years, we now are quite confident we can do a 1.0 version for in months for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it's, you know, it's going to grow. I mean, and who knows, our version of tapestries may not be the one that grows. I think that's, you know, it will happen. And it will be multi-user and it will be collaborative.
Vint, I can see your yellow hand.
It's Vint again. I had written down the multi-user question, Peter, so thank you for asking it. Our experience with multi-user documents at Google has been very powerful, and for small groups of people. If you imagine, however, that a tapestry is broadly available to tens of millions of people, the state, you would not want to have state information for 10 million people all dicking around with the same document. So you can immediately see the need for some kind of data structures that would isolate the behavior of a group against this background tapestry without interfering with other people who might be interacting with the tapestry. That's an interesting challenge because the current implementation, the object contains the state information in our implementation of Google Docs.
Our assumption is that tapestries, there's the understanding that if you want to be in a tapestry with somebody else, you have to give each other permission, and you're in that instance of that tapestry. And if you decide to fork it, you fork it for for yourselves and not for everybody else, obviously. I mean, we dealt with a lot of these questions when we were doing Social Book, which never, you know, didn't come to market, but this idea of people reading together and annotating something together, and how you could do that as a group and not screw up other people's experience. Although where we went with Social Book, which I think was important, was that if the permissions were in place, I might be reading a book with Vin, and our annotations, if we made them public, would be available to other people as well. They could basically click on a community tab and see everybody's comments. But anyway, it's the social experience of documents. I mean, Google Docs has sort of been by far the most successful example of that. But you know, anything less than that isn't good enough at this point.
Yeah.
A hugely important underlying thing here is, and I'm going to start with web and go backwards, is the infrastructure. Because also I have two fears about the near future. One of them is we're going to run out of imagination in terms of the audience, just like Doug and other people did amazing things in the 60s. And then the 80s and 90s, a desktop PC was defined as being specific things. Imagination went out the window. That's going to happen to VR. But the other thing that I'm really concerned about is you go into a VR environment, you create an artifact, a connected artifact. You go to another environment by another vendor, and you either can't open it, which would be absolutely insane, just like a Word file in the olden days, right? So what I'm seeing you are contributing here is an infrastructure for how you thread these things together. So I think that, yes, this is really nice to see on a traditional display, but I think that with real support, this, and of course, what we're working with Visual Meta, a few things to allow you to go in, do amazing stuff, whether it's 2D, 3D, whatever, and then go somewhere else will be so important. I am so scared. I mean, I love and adore Brandel. I'm a Mac user fanboy, but I'm really scared that when Apple comes out with their headset, whatever formats they decide are the initial ones, it's going to be cemented in reality forever. We need to scream and say, these are the useful and open ones. I think that's one of the reasons it's so amazing to see what you're doing, because it's not static, it's so dynamic. Over.
Yeah.
Shaking of head from Bob and over to Peter.
Okay, I was wondering if you'd ever seen the Chat Circles user interface. I'm dropping it into the chat now. That was an MIT Media Lab project that dealt very nicely with dealing with groups of people interacting in the same space. And it used basically a large spatial plane representing each person in the space as a circle, and you could move around and you'd be able to hear people who are within a certain radius of your location, but you'd also be able to see the circles of people further away twitching, so you could get a sense of where there were clusters of people. And I think you could overlay that on your system to provide an interface for managing the large numbers of people potentially interacting in the same tapestry. So you could sort of think of they'd be in different phases, and you'd be able to see that there are other people who are out of phase with you and bring yourself into phase with their conversations very fluidly.
Yep, beautiful. She was the person to do Wordle, isn't she?
I'm not sure what she did after MIT.
I think she went to IBM and did Wordle.
Yeah, IBM sounds right.
I'm curious, so about the sort of the authoring picture and more broadly the way in which you feel. So it based on the sort of the arrangement of the tapestries that you have so far, they seem like they're fairly canonical and durable insofar as you could point to this tapestry or that tapestry, and so that there's a rationale to have them existing as a distinct artifact that is intentionally constructed and delineated, so that this is the end of the tapestry. This is what it is. And so I'd be really interested in sort of the current state of authoring as you sort of have it, as you desire it, and as well whether there's room to pull on the thread, pardon the pun, of that continuity of it. How intentionally it needs to be created versus what other options exist in that sort of space.
Well, first of all, I mean, our assumption is that version 1.0 you'll simply be dragging and dropping from a folder of objects onto the field. I mean, right now it's kludgier than that, but it will be very simple to drag and drop and assemble it as you want. And when you quote publish a tapestry, it is frozen. But as I was trying to say earlier, it's very easy for a reader to push a button and in effect fork the tapestry and either add things or rearrange things as suits her. and can publish or not publish, etc. I mean, I think everybody here will understand what I mean when I'm saying this. I think that for me, I'm not a programmer, but when we had the pre-release version of HyperCard, when it was called Wildcard, and suddenly I was able to hook up a video disc player to a computer, and I could start to make things that were had value without being a programmer. So HyperCard sort of became, and then my son, who's now an engineer at Google, cut his teeth on HyperCard. And so it killed me when Jobs killed that. And Tapestries in some ways is our attempt to go back to a time when there were tools for teachers and students to start to make things that had value and currency. I mean, it's ridiculous that we haven't had anything as good as HyperCard in all these years. And that's sort of where, conceptually, I'm starting from. The Tapestries need to have hypertalk of some sort. You need to be able to have an if-then statement in a tapestry. We'll get there. I mean, but I think that's where our focus is at the moment. But it's back to your question statement. Several people have, when I've shown them this, gone a direction that, in some ways, thankfully, none of you have gone yet, which is, so can this be hooked up to AI in a way that I give a subject matter and the tapestry is automatically built, from. And the answer in my mind is always, yeah, I imagine we could do that, but that's sort of not where I'm starting from.
So Mark and I spent the last week at the Hypertext conference, and two relevant things came up again and again. It's spatial hypertext is one. This is related to that. Why hasn't it been invested in? And also the kind of basic programming you're talking about now. If you're going to have a proper hypertext environment, you need to be able to have clever links that have a little bit of if-then and have a little bit of knowledge of previous stuff. So to have like a hypertalk thing now is not going against what you said about not being a programmer, even though it could obviously sound like that. I think it's really, really crucial to enable users to be able to do some basic scripting without having to go whole hog to write, this much code to initialize before they can decide what they're going to write below. Anyway, that's just me. Mark.
Yeah, I was just wondering, looking at the tapestries and saying that, so, you showed us a number of, interesting sort of setups there, and some were in essential grids, and some of them had a bit more of almost a sort of narrative structure to them. Do you capture the, I'm trying to avoid the word link, but the intentionality of placing this thing alongside that thing? And I say that without there's no hidden question in that. I'm just thinking on the fact that if I put, say, two things together within the same tapestry, I'm doing it with some intent, and that's worth capturing at some point, both perhaps for me, for my future self, or for someone whom I wish to inform by the tapestry I'm making.
The best way to answer that, I think, is that one thing that's driven all of my work over all this time has been that when you make an authoring tool, that it's important not to restrict a single pixel. In other words, if I'm really going to empower people to make things, then I have to allow them to decide what goes on what page where, or what goes into what visual field where. Because it's a very slippery road. Once you start to restrict pixels, you end up in a different place.
Okay, I perhaps thinking of, I see that and accord with it. I was thinking more that just a sense of understanding that how when I view your tapestry and understand the relationship between, the first box and well, any other box that might be in there.
I think that's up to the tapestry maker. In other words, if the connections between objects in the tapestry can be made in lots of different ways. It can be made with arrows, it can be made with contextual text, it can be made by the placement of two things next to each other. I mean, there are so many ways of doing it. And, you know, hopefully when tapestries come out into the world, whoever does it, there's going to be a lot of exploration at first of people discovering new ways to put things together. I think that those of us who grew up solidly in the print era, we think differently than kids who are growing up today who, where video and interactive media is what they informs their view of things. And I'm pretty excited to see what my grandchildren do with tapestries. It won't be the same thing. I'm hoping it's far enough away from the linearity of text that they will get someplace interesting. And I do think most tapestries will be looked at in three-dimensional heads, whether it's some form of XR. Not at first. At first, we're going to be on our computer screens, but that will change.
Yeah, well, that's good, and it's good to hear your point about it not just being a matter of handing it all over to AI. Not that AI is a bad thing per se, but the idea that it should be doing everything is potentially horrifying. So thanks. I'll cede to Vin.
Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity, and there's a lot of looking forward to having the video of this so I can go back and get each one of these questions and really think them through.
This is pretty amazing. In an hour or less, you managed to essentially upend a lot of people's thinking, mine certainly. Just one thing which strikes me as being extraordinary about this whole design, and it harks back to the basic architecture of the World Wide Web. The entire structure that you've described is deeply dependent on reference and resolution, in the sense that tapestry is this collection of references. And the fact that the references have to be resolved opens up this wonderful indirection, because the resolution could change over time. If you had huge demand for something, maybe you turn it into a CDN reference later because you couldn't serve up all the video from one website. All those things. This fact that it is there's indirectness and resolution involved in this, then the tapestry itself is just a collection of references. In effect, it's amazingly powerful when you think about the compactness of the tapestry relative to the content that it presents.
Exactly. Thank you for understanding it so deeply.
We usually do 2 hours. We're happy to go a bit further on this. Absolutely.
I'm the arm candy for my partner who's giving a speech here in Birmingham, and I have to go be her arm candy at a cocktail party.
Absolutely.
If I may, I would really love my last question. My last question is hopefully a good thing to put a bow on that. First of all, this is amazing. What's next? And then second and related is, what do you want from other people, including, and most importantly, perhaps us?
You stole my question, Brandel.
I'm going to think of a good ask. I mean, I'm so pleased by your collective response. I'd like to think of a really good answer to that question. Okay.
Why don't you come back and say it, either on a Monday or Friday? Just take whatever time you need. Come back and join us anytime, okay. And we can work on that further, because I think helping you. Yes, great, useful. Working on what you, it also helps us think. It's a very relevant space. So we're very grateful for your contribution here.
Thank you very, very much.
Peter, anything quick from you before Bob disappears?
Yes, I just wanted to comment on how much I liked the observations about the need to embed past systems so they'd be available, and how it's impossible to run old Mac software. And putting on my lawyer hat, I think a big problem is everyone is afraid of the licensing issues on the core ROMs for old platforms. And Congress could really fix this if they just passed a clear bill. It could be a one-pager that simply says, for purposes of fair use, if the ROM of an obsolete computing system is not available, copying and reproducing that ROM and making it available to people until such time as the current owner of the IP makes it available in a commercial form shall be deemed fair use. And just put that in the law, one-page bill, they could have it whipped through in an afternoon, and it would solve so much of this difficulty. I found wonderful Mac emulator systems, but they would require me to be able to boot my old broken Mac that I had a license to the ROM in, to be able to get the data on the ROM off, which I can't do because the old machine is broken. So even though I'm legally licensed, even under the current intellectual property scheme, to be able to access that ROM, I physically can't access it. And no one's willing to share them online because they're afraid of a lawsuit by Apple or some other megacorp coming after them. And it could be fixed very easily. Just declare fair use to reproduce ROMs of obsolete hardware.
And on that note, thank you, Bob.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Really great presentation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wow, that was really good. Thanks for organizing this, Frodo.
Oh, I didn't actually do anything. It was you and Bob who organized it. We just found the time happened to fit in this community, which is great.
Wow, it was a perfect choice of topic for today's discussion. Anyway, I took several pages worth of notes there.
Oh, by the way, I invented this week a journal function in Author.
Oh, okay.
And I
How is it?
bothered Mark and my fellow attendees very much with this, that, and the other feature. And Mark used the swear word, I think it was featureitis or something, and feature creep. And Mark is not an idiot. When he said
creep,
that, I have to listen. So basically, the fun thing is that it's a feature in Author, as I said. So at the end of it, in the design project, it's turned into one single thing. And that is, as long as you have Author open, if you do Command J for journal, it opens a specific document dedicated as a journal, and that's it. No other features. So like in the meeting with you guys now, I did what you did, Vint, but I type it in there. So over time, I just fill it in. So some of it will be a heading, some of it will be a citation. I just want to see after a couple of months if it becomes a complete mess, or because it's digital, I can actually find stuff.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
But thank you.
Just while we still have Bob's stuff in our mind, have I explained Forest to you folks?
Forest?
The hierarchical tree-based history viewer that I built back in 08?
I don't think so, but I
ringing a
would
bell.
love to see here.
Yeah, I will, but I just wanted to, before we were on that, because that's I feel like it's highly pertinent to what Bob presented and what we were talking about before. But sorry, Mark, you actually had your hand up, so I will.
Yeah, I was just going to explain that the reason I mentioned sort of scope creep to Freud wasn't actually an antipathy to what was being discussed, but reflecting on the fact that there are sort of two things going on. Is one is, however, one is an issue of whether the new thing fits elegantly inside Author, which it does. But I was also reflecting on the difficulty that if one said, right, so you can now effectively do some journaling inside your document, the people who really like journaling saying, but I use this other thing and I really like it. And then falling into this endless pointless debates we all get into about tool X versus tool Y, rather than to ponder on the nature of the interaction that's going on, whether it's only used in Author or in other apps as well, and the point about then how you'd use it. So the point is, what might I what might I journal here, as opposed to context switching to another thing. Because often we're using a specific tool, either because, you know, you needed a tool to do it way back when and now it's good, or you do it so heavily compared to the ordinary person that you really do need a specific tool. So I wasn't being entirely flippant in my observation to Fred.
No, I don't think it was. And Brandel, we'll go over to you in a second, but I think there's a really important wider point here. And that is early days of the Mac, keyboard shortcuts, evangelism, they had to be the same in every application, right? I think that is so insanely important because anybody can make the best note-taking tool. It isn't that hard if you really think and do it, but then it becomes yet another specific tool for specific use, right? So to try to have tools that are as general and as possible, and I think it really relates to what Bob showed us, because the two things I quote unquote invented for my journal before I threw them away, one was highlight in red. So when you fold your document, those are kind of to-do items and they're annoying and you want to get rid of them. So you remember, but we already have a highlight. The other one was a click insert of date, time, and location. But for crying out loud, you can type that out if you really wanted, right? So each one of those the user would have to memorize, and they would be specific to this. But to let them already use the tools they have in a slightly new framing is kind of interesting. So over to Brandel.
Oh, Vince got his hand up now. I'm happy to. But I mean, I'd love to explain it in the context of what we just saw with Bob. But yeah, I'm happy to. I actually failed to put my hand up. The hot forest, the thing that I built was looking at browser history. Once we got multi-tabbed browsing in the mid 2000s in widely available consumer browsers, what I observed was that the way that we tend to navigate as a consequence of that multi-tabbed environment is to have tabs that sort of spring forward other new tabs and that we navigate between them. But the single linear view of what browser history is woefully inadequate to represent and reflect what we do. And so what I built was showing essentially the state of all of the tabs sort of smeared over time, essentially. So you can see which tabs were focused, so that you change from that tab to that tab. You can also see when you open this tab from that tab, and so that you preserve and represent all of the relational artifacts.
Do you have
and I feel like it would be relevant for.
Do you have a
I do have a couple of things. I had a presentation I drew back in 2007, 2008, but it doesn't look very good because I learned a lot more about how to draw since then. But yes.
Just show us.
Sure, I'll dig it up. But yeah, I'm really interested in the sort of, and that's one of the reasons why I was asking Bob about the incidental nature of authoring, or the incidental nature of the generation of these artifacts versus the intentionality of it, and where that continuum sort of lies in terms of being able to kind of represent those things. Yeah, I'll find it. Thanks.
Okay. While you're still here, Vince, let's talk a little bit about this Future of Text symposium while Brandel does his digging. So it'll be hybrid, of course. It'll be mostly here in London. For those of you who can come in, please do. Unfortunately, we don't have space in the house for reasons you all know at the moment. But the reason, I just want to make it clear, Vint, that the reason for the VR hype and mania is not that VR is everything. It most certainly isn't. I cannot see myself for the next 30 years giving up my laptop or my Apple Watch for that sake. But it's an opportunity to fire up the imagination. Mm-hmm. And it's also an opportunity for us who care about augmenting to think without being brainwashed by others, to do our own invention, so to speak. So what we're planning to, yeah.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that if we're going to do any demos and not everyone is outfitted with the appropriate VR equipment, we probably need to have a way of showing people what someone is seeing in the VR device in order to understand the examples that we might be talking about.
Yeah, we probably, the format, so talking to Klaus, who hasn't fully committed yet, but what we'll probably do is have papers submitted a month before, so it's not that far in the future. And the papers can be small or long, doesn't really matter, same as every future of text. And on the day, we'll probably have 5-minute demos because we should have already everybody's paper, and the demo could be just saying the same thing because it's the dialogue that's unique about our conference series. But if there are any VR demos, they should be given in good time in advance so people can have really tried them, even if they have to borrow a headset or walk into an Apple store, not an Apple store, you know, whatever store to try it on. Because the experience of being in there is so different. One of the surprising things for me, I made this knowledge room using really crude tools, and it's actually really easy to do a basic thing. And then I did some connecting lines to show relationships. And I thought that would be the most obvious thing you'd want, plus some text floating in space, but it was so annoying. It was like someone had washing lines in my face.
Mm-hmm.
So for us to get the experience of just trying it on, and I have to admit, most of us, even in this community, we don't use it very much. It's not ready yet. You know, it really is QuickTime 320 by 240 days. It is so crude. You know, so that's why it's also so exciting, right? It's not there. We have to make it there. Vint, you still have your hand up, or?
Yes, because I wanted to make one other observation about both the tapestry discussion and perhaps a more general observation. There's something you remember in Unix or Linux, there's this notion of pipelining or piping where you can connect things together. And this is an incredibly powerful mechanism for interoperation. One of that may be something to pay attention to is to assure that the various functional components of not just tapestry, but just more generally web-oriented things have this interoperability feature. And it looks to me like one of the ways in which that has been implemented in the web anyway is that the browser becomes the facilitator of this interoperation, because it's the thing that's ingesting the references, and it's the thing that's producing the presentation and interactions. So I only mention it because it could be some people are already talking about virtual worlds and metaverse, and the question of can they interwork with each other? Can you go from one world to another? Does that even compute? And I think we ought to be working very hard to identify methods that will allow that to be implemented, and to argue standards that would allow it as well.
Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah, look, I just have to jump up and down like I'm in an American church on that one. It is so important. The discussion I've been using with people recently is, imagine you're at Hampton Court here in London. Because currently, right now, they have, it's really wonderful to go there. Henry VIII walks around, they have people in costumes, and it really evokes, even though you see people with mobile phones, it's amazing. So it's like an AR, VR experience, having it overlaid, these actual actors. But so imagine if you're there in a VR environment and you say, okay, I want to see Hampton Court in 1940, which is not a period you would normally think of. How do you do that transition? Do you go to an app store to see if someone has made an experience for that time? Do you go to a website? Do you use a URL? Do you use a time marker? Do you use a space marker? Navigation in VR. Because there won't be one world there. I mean, Vint, I remember the first time I met you when we had breakfast at that hotel here in London for the interview. And you were all about internet and you were trying to be all humble, which you're quite good at. And I said, well, Vint, with the internet, you haven't invented a highway. This is back when we talked about the superhighway. What you've invented is a mechanism for anybody to make a highway anytime they want. So in VR, what will happen is that we're inventing a world that anybody can make at any time they want, right? That's a mess. So how do you allow people to go in between those things? It's going to be a really, really important discussion. And I think the way we can solve it, if it can be solved by a community such as us, is two things. One, talk and write about it. Two, do it. Literally build examples of, you're in this place, You know, and how do you go somewhere else? Do you pretend you're a wizard and you do a magic spell and you have a ball of a globe or a timeline? You know, to actually make it fun and tangible, because it cannot be take your headset up, type stuff in your computer and go back in. That's not long-term solution. But the only way we'll know what actually works is, and thank you, Brandel, for ramming it down my brain, trying it. Yeah, Brandel.
Mark got in first.
Oh, he's been up there so long. Okay, Mark, what have you got?
Sorry, I was going to reflect on the fact that as we were looking at the tapestries earlier and the different edits of things, I was thinking, what a nice cross-cut to the stuff that Dini gave in her keynote at ACM, and I was about to put a link in for it, and I found that yet again the conference this year have decided to not memorialize the keynotes at all, which brings you on to another sort of insight I had sitting at the conference, having just given a paper about having to reconstruct all the citation network for the conference, basically to reconstruct information we already had, is, why are we still thinking as if we were printing paper in 2022? The PDFs are fine, but there ought to be a button that, quite apart from downloading the whole of the proceedings, that basically I just get I get the data, the metadata of all the authors, all their affiliations, all the interrelations, how they link into the citation. That to me ought to be the primary output. But the conferences are not set up for this at all. I mean, it's a shame. It's no one's direct fault, but mainly I take it that our eyes are so firmly fixed on the rearview mirror when it comes to conferences that we've perhaps lost sight of what we're up to. That's
a good point for our conference upcoming now. I just brought a note on that in our chat, but Brandel, please go ahead.
Right. Well, I mean, it's part and parcel of an observation that Apple has made about its worldwide developers conferences over the years, as the sort of the content of the conference has transitioned from being primarily for the audience in the auditoriums and the theaters, with the artifacts being produced as incidental byproducts that may or may not be of some benefit, transitioning through to being sort of an event that people can be co-present for, and there's some kudos for that, whatever else, through to, once we were in the pandemic, recognizing that these are independently valuable of our ability to fill a room with people sitting in them anyway. So one of the big challenges that Apple actually faces is what do we do if and when we go back to in-person conferences, because what we believe is that the purpose of it is the benefit of creating that artifact and making sure that artifact has the greatest value possible. So it has clickable time codes and the transcript and things like that. Really, really wonderful kind of features. Really similar to what Salman Khan observed about Khan Academy and his nephews not liking to actually be in the room with him. Back on the subject of the standards, people talking about metaverse and 3D worlds and things like that. Unsurprisingly, that's something that's on my mind as well a lot, but I've decided not to pay too much attention to it at this point, because I think we need an application in the sense of being applied to something, not as in an app. I mean, obviously it's going to be web, but there needs to be something that it is applied to that is legitimately useful in order to be able to drive at least one sort of perspective over those standards. There was an open metaverse standards forum sort of announcement recently, and that was sort of spurred in large part by some of the original progenitors of VRML, and they're very excitable people, but they never found something for it to do. And so I'm deeply concerned by anybody's efforts to standardize before a use. And so to that end, one of my goals is to make sure that hypertext and web are driven by something a little bit more mundane in terms of what it is things are and what it is people do with them and the relationships they need, in order to make sure that these standards encode some utility. And that's hopefully actually going to drive people away from the people who are more excited about the hype train than the people who are more interested in, like, when you say word processing and virtual reality, some people are completely revolted, and some people just stand there dazed. I want to make sure that we're primarily attracting the latter kind of group into those conversations.
So I feel compelled to respond on the standard side. And I actually agree very greatly with the point that you should try things out before you standardize them, because you'll find out why the standard you wrote doesn't work.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there are some rules of thumb that I have found quite helpful. And that is to assume that whatever it is you decide to standardize, at whatever point you standardize something, that's not the end. And the reason is that you always discover new things that you need to do. So you want to design standards that are evolvable and have loose couplings. And so the internet architecture has all of those features. You can add layers to it. You can extend new protocols at a given layer, and nobody gets angry at you. To first order. So it may be possible to work your way into a suite of standards by starting with some that are general and flexible, and then allowing them to evolve as experience dictates.
Wise words, unsurprisingly, but very nice to hear. One thing that this community and other communities tend to go in and out of is looking at their own record. I think definitely to address what Randall and Vint were talking about, we should augment our own record in so many ways, because any community will need to be able to find stuff they've said before and see how it relates to other stuff, right? And it's a real thing. And we've started, we have 2 books, we have a journal, we have 10 years of annual, we have monthly meetings, we have twice, this is normal, but we have an interest in this. So
it just occurred to me that the World Wide Web idea, of course, is brilliant, as has been demonstrated. In the absence of search, it would be almost useless, given the scale at which the websites and content have grown. And I don't know whether Tim was thinking about search when he was doing the web design necessarily, and that's not a criticism. I'm just thinking about the various things that come together to make these ideas hypergolic. And it's sometimes pretty fascinating to discover that there was an idea that somebody had that nobody had thought of before that actually made whatever it was that you had just built far more useful than it would have been otherwise. So I'm wondering, I'm waiting to find out what little thing comes along that we didn't think of that somebody figures out that makes it infinitely more useful.
I think that is.
I think it's a really interesting point about whether Tim or others sort of envisioned that, and at a certain level, I mean, if you think about what hypertexts were in the 1980s, they certainly exist. As Mark has been trying to seek, what Windows Help was one of the first most public. That obviously there were others before, but certainly one of the most public. There's a certain. I wouldn't be surprised if people were offended by search or the ability to disintegrate a hypertext into and break down the barriers and boundaries between it. Because if you can randomly leap into one piece of one person's hypertext and then connect it to another, then there's a manner in which that is sort of attacking the very core of how a hypertext is constituted. And that's actually one of my greatest goals, is how to do the most damage to people's ideas by pulling them apart and rendering the integrity that they have as compromised as possible. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about with YouTube recently has been the sort of the chapter search and the transcript stuff giving rise to being able to access different parts of it and start to treat a video like a text rather than a single sort of black box.
Yeah.
I see your hand, Mark, but just since I was almost going to interrupt Randall in the beginning, This comes down to, search and links and all of that is obviously completely crucial, but it only works for things that are addressable. So to work on addressing in this context is just so absolutely crucial. And how you address things in a VR thing will mean so many different things. I mean, Doug had, of course, view specs, and we talked about the web. And one thing I realized is after a URL, you can put anything and the browser will ignore that, which is amazing. So we did the thing of having the view specs encoded in the URL. So you could just send that to someone. Of course, that's quite common today for web searches and all kinds of things. But I'm just wondering how that relates to virtual environments, because if you're sharing a location of a virtual environment, what are you actually sharing? Are you sharing the contents within it? Are you sharing how it looked at the time? Are you sharing the lighting? There's going to be so many variables, and socially over time, we're going to have to decide what is addressable from different perspectives. Yes, Mark.
I was just thinking, yeah, sorry, just my microphone's on. As we were talking about search and things, I mean, something that really sort of was focused in my mind, having to work on, doing this review of hypertext conference data, is just how completely utterly useless most of the keywords are. Now some things are fairly unique, but there are fewer Vinton Cerfs in the world than there are Mark Andersons. So some things are more easily found than others. But actually, given that a lot of our search is basically based on brute force keyword string matching, that what we don't do is we don't put much effort into recording things, memorializing it with a thought to how they might be found. Because how you think about something as, say, the author who's just created it is not the way you think of it as the person who thinks this thing might exist, but they don't yet know. Because if they knew what it was, they wouldn't have to search for it. Well, that's a different sort of search problem. And so that's another thing that I think we've collectively not addressed for a long time. I think through the conceit that the computers will get stronger and somehow magically, well, I guess AI will sort it, and it will to an extent, but it's taking an awful large hammer to something that might be solved more simply if we just thought about it a bit more. It won't solve everything, but I do, it just occurs to me, and it really came home, that if you're writing a paper, instead of rushing to slap a few things on as a keyword, that perhaps, you take a moment to think, what would someone look for in this? Or indeed, that places of publication adopted a method of actually adding such information as a post hoc enrichment. Because, for instance, if you're writing about an emergent field, how do you apply the term that hasn't yet been invented that exactly describes the very thing that you've just written about? So you can't do it in the moment. But we don't have a method to sort of fix that after, apart from obviously the collective memory of search experiences stored in the search engines.
A brief point about 360 videos. Even 360 videos need a point of view. The one that I filmed of us, Vint, I put the camera on the table between us. It is very uncomfortable to watch, because a human head shouldn't be there. It should be where a human was. So after that, if I need to do 360, I put it where someone might sit. And
actually, so the 360 that I'm referring to in the chat is an invention of the advanced technology group at Google. And it involved the use of 8 or 9 cameras simultaneously rolling with events taking place in the full environment. The question that arose is, how do you experience that? And we started out by presenting these 360 videos on the mobile. And the idea was that you could move around. It was the moral equivalent of putting a VR thing on, except that you were holding your mobile in your hands, and as you moved around, the mobile knew where it was pointing. It could sense the motion, and it would show some different video. So one of the interesting challenges is, if you're editing a 360 video, how does the editor work? Because it's you've got to figure out, okay, so if the viewer is here, then this is what the viewer is going to see and hear. And, you know, and if you're over here, then you're going to see and hear something different. And editing that turns out to be hard. And they had to invent a whole new suite of tools in order to figure out how to edit a 360 video. It was fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. Really is. So in our closing moments here, guys, what are the thoughts on our Future Text Symposium in terms of making an effort for augmenting the record of what we do using what we've been thinking about now?
I think this ought to be an exploratory event where a sort of unformed concept is getting exposure, and we let people speculate about what it might
Sorry,
mean.
Edgar, I'm in a meeting. Come and say hi real quick, but I have to concentrate. Sorry, Edgar came in. You said exploratory event and then the door opened. I'm so sorry. Please repeat.
Not a problem. I
you.
have those things happening too. I was saying that I thought this event should be exploratory in the sense that we are at the early stages of this idea. And so we ought to encourage people to just explore what it might mean. Hello, how are you? So lovely to see you.
Can you say hi?
Hi.
Oh, he's off now. Okay. Actually, he brought me this paper. I'm not sure
Okay.
you mind, but you brought it from a birch tree, which is, of course, where we get the word book.
Oh
Edgar,
my.
that because of that, we have the word book. Did you know that? Right.
It does occur to me too, an interest, because you were talking about, you know, the journal of the future and text, how I do it. I think another thing I took away from listening to sort of Dean's work is there's an interesting skein to put around it in terms of effectively the side observations. You know, this is where this thing happened, or this is where this idea emerged, and you know, even perhaps with a footnote, and it turned out to be a completely wrong idea. You know, see, you know, journal a year later or something, which is massively useful, I think, to well, our future selves and actually people coming to it afresh. It can be useful. I mean, I don't think one should be embarrassed about false starts, because there always are, or the fact that, you know, or maybe we hit top dead center first time. It doesn't really matter, but having that extra chain of commentary is a lovely thing that it's much easier to do now than previously would be a, you know, bit of art scholarship all of its own. But we can begin to seed that record as part of what we do. It's not a necessity, but I think it would be useful and interesting to do.
Mark, it's Vint. I'd like to reinforce that. And the reason is that in the recent past, there has been an enormous amount of attempt to reconstruct what the hell happened in the early days of internet. And we've discovered that we didn't take very good notes. They are the RFCs, of course. But as we moved away from documenting everything and having video conferences, for example, you know, a lot of the note taking evaporates. So I always thought it was egotistical to think that what I was doing was important. And so when Bob and I wrote our first paper, and we had the literally handwritten hard copy, and I asked my secretary to type it. She said, "What should I do with the original?" And I said, "Throw it away, because we can read the original. I mean, we can read your typing better than the original." And of course, many historians have chastised me for that. Yeah. And the more I experience this in, you know, creative ferment, the more I realize it's important, or may be important if it's successful, that people find out, well, how did this all happen, and what's the story behind it?
Yeah, it's lovely that we, you know, saw a talk last week of someone's actually found some of the McBee punch card sort cards that Doug used for planning his augment paper. I mean, that's just delightful. Because hats off, the guy had seen a reference, passing reference to using these cards. And so rung up the library and said, do you have any of these? And they said, well, we'll go away and have a look. And it turns out they did. And it's got his, writing on the back of it. Now, who knew? Because that's the first I've heard of it. So hats off to this guy who, had a sheer inquisitiveness. Because it would appear, it just shows often the stuff's there, but unless you rootle around, and that's just, it's lovely to see that link back to an earlier form of annotation and sorting system.
Except this is preservation by accident. This is not a good plan.
Well, I mean, this is one of the things I've been dwelling on in trying to just somehow stabilize and save at least into a VM some of the early hypertext systems.
Yeah.
Simply because so many are gone already.
But one of the things, just really on that point, Vint, as I said earlier, you're not a very arrogant man, and you didn't know at the time that your work would have this effect. However, management of ego and so on, we don't think we're necessarily in this group going to change the world or anything like that. But we think that there's two things worthwhile. Number one, we need to have this record accessible for ourselves, then also to develop systems that others who will do amazing things in the world can use. And one of the things that becomes so incredible in a virtual environment, one of the first things Brandel showed us was he'd taken a transcript of one of our meetings and turned it into quite literally what looked like a carpet tapestry that was color-coded and shape-coded based on what we were talking about. So to have multiple ways to be able to go through a year's worth of dialogue is, hang on a second, I'm being invaded here by a pirate.
Oh my gosh, this is really scary.
Yes.
Internet piracy.
Internet piracy indeed.
Yeah, do you have a parrot that goes with him?
And here's Anton to be his guard. Hello, pirate. Look amazing.
It's for my show.
Yeah, I know it's for you, show. You're Superman in the show, aren't you? As in, you're super being pirate. Wow. Right. So yeah, this is part of the. This goes to what we're talking about. Edgar and Anton comes in to this meeting. It's super nice. In the future, that may be the most important part of the meeting, right? We don't know that. How do you say what is ephemera from our point of view now, but which may not be in the future? The thing about the kind of record and opportunities, time is fascinating because there is such a thing. So imagine we actually have a breakthrough in this group. It's going to happen at a certain point in time. So it will be incredible. Brandel has already built corridors of time for Wikipedia and stuff. So, we build those types of things. But imagine if we find out that we had much better dialogue when there was a rainstorm in California because one of the people was more interested in being inside. There's a sword here as well.
The pirates have swords.
This one does, and it's a knight's sword. And yes, see here, that's actually a completely different thing. I think that in VR, instead of having applications, we will have tools that we take with us. Maybe. Like wherever you go, you have your little tool belt. Anyway, go slay a dragon.
Oh, can you talk like a pirate? Arr, pieces of eight, pieces of eight.
What is it? September the 18th. International Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Yep, it is a thing.
Anyway, so yeah, in terms of the record, we got to start playing with that more. I think we got to pretend we're the brain trust of the universe just for fun, just to see what happens, and then future of text in a year.
So one thing I can report to you, Google has worked hard on voice to text transcription. We have a number of tools for that purpose. The Chrome browser automatically does that if it detects incoming speech. I know it does it for English. I don't know what other languages it currently is outfitted for. However, it doesn't get things right. And so the result is that the record is blemished by the mistakes of the speech understanding or speech recognition. as an example, there was a reference to precedent or something like that in our conversation, and it was rendered as pregnant. And in another instance, the word vagaries, unfortunately, was translated as vaginas. And so one thing we should be very thoughtful about is that if we use automated tools to augment the record, that we recognize that there are blemishes associated with them that need to be dealt with.
There is, I just texted my wife there to bring a book in here if she has a chance. What you're talking about there is obviously super important. There's a book called, I think it's called The Limits of Language that I keep bringing up. And it makes the point that language is basically like landmarks for social organizing. And the subtitle of the book is Why Language is Great for Lawyers and Bad for Scientists. And it just makes me so happy because even though it's about language, not text, it makes the point that language and text have specific uses and specific limitations. So the kind of mistakes you're talking about, they will happen, and that's totally fine. As long as we're aware of them, we try to reduce them, and we have access to other media. Oh, there's Emily. Come say hi. You haven't. Oh, look, there she is.
There, good to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Sorry, we're celebrating 4th of July for no reason. Anyway, this is the book.
I love it.
Oh yes, I've seen that one. Right.
And this is what Brandel introduced, which is just absolutely an incredible book. And finally,
another thing that oh, go ahead.
Just since there's 3 books, this is a book that Edgar gave me quite randomly in a bookshop, but it's turned out to be really, really interesting to get inspirations for virtual navigations.
Oh, that's really neat. I mean, one of the things that the vagaries problem there points to me is the necessity to preserve the intermediary artifacts, similar to your transcript, your manuscript, in that it can be exceptionally difficult to figure out what the original meaning was, given enough time and distance between it. And one of the things that I've played with in my text to speech or speech to text things is actually encoding snippets per paragraph, and then actually recording the sound into the web browser at the same time, such that if you see something as an obvious flaw, you can click on it and you can hear it. And so if the system is flawed in its rendering of that, then you at least have some recourse for it. More generally, that's I think an essential sort of perspective to take on the authoring of many things, is having the ability to encode those intermediary kind of steps in order to be able to infer intent if necessary from anything that was mistaken.
God, that's a wonderful idea. It makes me think of a related one. The Folger Shakespeare Library has been digitizing a lot of its holdings, and a lot of those are manuscripts, not printed text. And even if it's printed text, the fonts are different from today's fonts, and recognition is not easy. And so what happens is that the digital recognized text is overlaid on the actual text, so that you can look at the actual text and see whether they've misunderstood it. And I love the idea of the audio and the text rendering, the transcript being synchronized, so that the idea of being able to click on the text and listen to what it was is just fabulous. It's a really good idea.
Yeah,
thank you. I was really pleased with it. Also, the material, it allows you to sort of tease out the differences between in the material properties between text as speech and text as text as well. I think that there are some really interesting sort of variabilities and incomplete kind of overlap of the sort of the facilities and functions of text as written stuff and as oral speech, that it's really interesting to be able to kind of throw in sharp enough relief by holding them as close together like that. And I'm really excited about the idea of having actual manuscript plus type text plus potentially even synthesized speech overlaid over those things, because they are 3 very, very different sides of a strangely 3-sided coin.
we're talking about 2 different temporalities, of course, and I think it's perfect what you're talking about. I think we also, and it's fun to talk about it on America Day today, discussions over the Constitution. What did that mean? What did this mean? what is interesting, of course, is to have definitions from that time be available. That's why the notion of the timeline is so fascinating and important. And it would also be amazing with a little bit of machine learning to be able to say, you know, Brandel used the term so-and-so, and then go into other Brandel readings and try to synthesize how he's used that term before. As in, you know, so we can see, okay, so Brandel probably meant this by that term, right? And again, time will change. In a year, you may very well have a different idea of what that thing was. So that's why threading it. I mean, one of the things, so we have two boys living with us now. One is 8, one is 13. 13-year-old is learning English and also learning history. So I had this idea in the hallway upstairs, drawing with a pencil a line and doing years. So as he learns history, he can write it on the wall. Emily, for some reason, vetoed the idea. But at least virtually, that should be possible, right? Or even better in AR. You have a timeline, and it doesn't show you anything by default. You have to put things onto it as you learn it. Same as in our meetings, we have to add it on. So the process of adding contextualizes it. There's so much opportunity here for putting in a record in a non-bucket way, putting it in a little bit intelligently, and then having amazing interactions with it later.
Another aspect of sort of capturing speech as well is the fact that, you know, this difference between our written and spoken language, because often, you know, we deal with elisions, for instance, in people's speech flawlessly by and large, as long as we can hear it properly, and we may use more euphemism sometimes in speech because it just livens things up a bit, which we wouldn't do if we were writing the same words. And that too causes a problem. I mean, I've been reflecting on this because helping Fred with the journal and looking at some of the cleaned up bits. And sometimes I've actually caught the very sort of transliteration that Vint alludes to, where the program has made a best guess, i.e. it's taken a word from the vocabulary, and actually what it was trying to deal with was a word that was actually muffled. And sometimes you actually do just want to put indistinct there because that's what it is. You may be able to guess it, you may not. And indeed, in a couple of such instances, I have been able to guess something and, you know, being confident enough to put it in. That's an editorial decision. But that's an interesting and complex part, because in the ideal world, I guess we'd all speak in the way we write, and it would probably be clearer for transcription purposes. But that's not going to happen in any way. Speech will be much more dull.
That's exactly why transcription is so hard, because we don't speak in complete sentences at all. We break things up, we pause, we halt, we branch off somewhere else. And so the normal rules of grammar don't help very much.
It also, at the same side, is also amazingly good. I use my Apple Watch to communicate with friends texting, and 99.999% of the time it gets it right. But of course, that is a small amount of text, even if it's a long message. So that is why within the whole future of text journal thing, for our transcript, we try to keep it very casual. We try to edit as little as possible. I think the only thing Mark and I do is remove so. All presenters say so at the beginning of every gosh darn paragraph. But, you know, we're not an academic journal. We can do that. It doesn't have to be super polished. It needs to be readable. That's all. So any further thoughts on what we should do for either the day or the future of text, or for the record of the day? Of course, there'll be written record, there'll be video. We should probably set up some special page for any virtual environments that are built to show this.
We certainly want to capture commentary, both audio commentary, but also any chat like commentary. Do you want to try to make it possible for people who are physically present to also have access to the online version, so that if there's, you know, a text chat going on in the online system, we capture, everybody can contribute, not just people who are remote, things like that.
Yeah, last week at the Hypertext conference, we all had our computers on, even if we were in the same room. So we were part of whatever medium. There were too many. There was a Slack, there was a special Google thing, there was a Zoom. We will have one, but whatever channel it is, we will all be on it, yes.
So I actually want to throw an idea at Brandel. because just because it sounds like it would be really cool if we could figure out how to do it. My wife and I are both hearing impaired, and so in big meetings, we often struggle. Some meetings have automatic captioning going on. That's always helpful, even though it isn't always right. But it occurred to me that if you take your mobile, which could have an app in it that has a microphone, and so you could do text to speech, I'm sorry, speech to text with that device. So we've done that with Live Transcribe, which is an application that was developed by one of our deaf employees. But here's the idea that I've been toying with and don't quite know if it's feasible. If everybody in the conference has a mobile and could run an app that would take whatever they said and transcribe it, and then make that broadcast to everybody so that everyone can see who's talking, because that's bound to the phone or the microphone anyway, and can see what they said. That would be this, and the microphone is close to them, so you end up with better quality transcription than you get from any other method. I wonder whether that would be a very hard app to build. It just
no, I think that it would be. Yeah, you could build it as a website, as sort of a co-present website where each individual audio stream is being encoded and recorded. You'd be able to have each of those speech streams kind of registered. I think it would be really interesting. One of the things that was really exciting that never got a lot of play was that Apple released audio zoom for at the same time as having optical zoom on iPhone cameras, so that you could record and it would apparently be able to use the multiple microphones to differentiate and say, I want to amplify the things that are in the central field versus the other ones. And something that I'm really intrigued by is the idea of being able to separate and enhance distinguishable audio streams.
Yeah.
Like you say, because hearing impairment often entails a lack of directionality. So yeah, I think that would be really, really interesting and something that I've been playing with, thinking about with these AirPods. They're phenomenally noise canceling, really, really good for that. And one of the things that means that you can do is then remix real life in terms of saying, like, based on, they also know which direction your head is pointing in. So that means that, for example, in a chat thing like this, for those who have the ability to discern, you could put different audio streams in different directions and have them attenuate with different angles, such that you would be able to tune. So like, no, I'm listening to Vin, So I think that between those things, the sort of the technological substrate definitely exists for it. I think there's, like Frodo was saying, the imagination gap in terms of making sure that we can put all of those pieces together. Again, I think this is one of those places where the disintegration of sort of co-present space is a really exciting thing to sort of aim for. It's like, what if we made everybody wear headphones so nobody could listen to each other organically? And as long as you're offending some people, then you're getting somewhere. But I think that would be really fascinating as a starting point to play with.
So I have to tell you that the transcript referred to which direction your hair is pointing as opposed to which direction your head is pointing, which I thought was. The transcriptions are really, truly amusing.
Yeah, it reminds me of Newton handwriting. The stereo thing is really, really powerful. There's been a few times on the radio where they actually do this. I'm driving a car and interview is here and the two subjects on the side. It helps so much. So we should absolutely be able to do that for this type of audio. And we have, of course, talked about distributed recording before, because after this call, I'm not going to upload this recording to YouTube and then put the URL into a company called sonics.ai. It'll do a good transcription of our speaking, but I have to go through and label every time it changes who's speaking, which is quite boring with all due respect. So if we all recorded our own, like the interview Vinton I did with the BBC, they sent us a thing, we recorded into that, and then the result of that was sent to the server, so the quality of the audio was much higher. Yeah, I think something like
that strikes me as very low-hanging fruit. The sort of thing that should be automatable. Like we're crying that AI will solve it for us, but certainly like voice prints are distinguishable.
Yeah, the Zoom system and know who's speaking because they know where they got the audio stream from. And so that should be automatically labeled.
Yeah, I mean, once the Sonic, it does, I have to label that. I've actually told them a feature request, please remember from next time, where it's generally the same bunch of people. But you have to, type in the name first time, and then it tries to match. And a few people in the group, it just mixes up every time. But if we did it locally, then, we could synchronize our commentary as well into this. A lot of things.
There is a discipline which arises only when the size of the discussion exceeds one screen. If you can't see everyone at the same time, and the system is not very swift at putting a view of the person speaking in everyone's screen, you get into a discipline where you say who you are before you speak. And it's almost tempting to say, why don't we just adopt that as a normal practice?
You are very good at that, Vint. I haven't met anyone who has that discipline other than you. That's a good point.
Well, I think it's time to wrap up, at least for me anyway. This has been super interesting. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today.
Well, Vint, no one invited you. You have a standing invitation every Monday, Friday. If you have time, hop in. No invitation.
Yeah, this just happened to be the 4th of July, and I had nothing else on my calendar. So
it's the one day you get free.
Right.
Oh, okay. So that's the freedom we're celebrating today. Right. Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day in whatever form you choose to have it. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you very, very much for today, everyone.
Same here.
It's been real productive. And good to see you, Peter.
Yeah. Yeah, the event is the first time we've seen Peter's face. He's always been a picture, but now he's got a new machine with a video. So it's been good. All right. Bye, guys.
Yeah, bye for now.
Bye-bye.